So the way that we usually start this show is just kind of by asking how each of you kind of got artistically started. Not necessarily like how did you become a cinematographer to this point, but just like, were you always creative? Were you always in film? Film school questions, all that kind of thing. Like what got your creative juices flowing? We'll start with Gale.
Hi, I'm Gale, and my whole career started because I had a love of photography ever since I was about 15 years old, and I was very lucky. I had access to a darkroom, so I was able to go and play for hours developing and printing and stuff like that. And I think that taught me so much valuable information about composition and contrast and image making. And from that, I developed into making a short film about the American philosopher and architect Buckminster Fuller. And I fell in love with cinematography then and went to the London Film School. So that's really where I started. And, so it was just by happenstance. I didn't design it. I just fell in love with image making,
Yeah. Were you constantly, were you like a big darkroom rat, or were you more about just kind of taking the photo, figuring out more compositional?
I was a big darkroom rat because I felt that that's where you could actually create magic. And I think that's led on to realizing how much of one's work as a cinematographer, even now, you should do on set and how much you should do in post. Because as a production's running, when you're actually shooting, that's the most valuable time on earth. And so if you spend 5 minutes going to the bathroom, it can cost thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
Quite literally. So the more you can decide what you can do in post with one person, the more efficient you can be as a DP. And I think getting to the point of having confidence in allowing things to fly on the set and then correct them in post is kind of where you need to be, and that's terribly important.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've said for a bunch of weeks now that like cinematography has definitely become a art form that has 1 foot squarely in post and 1 foot squarely on set, especially now with all the digital capture being
right.
Not specific, but paramount to the thing. What about you, Luke? How'd you get kind of started?
So I kind of got started. I think I've heard this story from 1,000 different filmmakers, but making, short films in high school.
Yep.
I convinced a teacher. It was like, I think it was an English class, but to do an essay, and I didn't really like writing. I said, well, how about a short film instead of an essay? And at the time, that was like not really a thing that you did. It kind of took her back. She's like, what are you talking about? I was like, I'll just make a short film instead of writing an essay. And that worked out really well. And I found, I got some friends together, and as we were making it, I found I was always kind of the one behind the camera. I was setting the shots, and figuring out how to edit on a VHS player and that kind of stuff. So I was sort of like, there's a little bit like a mix between that, and then there's a show that really got me interested in filmmaking called Movie Magic that used to be on the Discovery Channel. And they just showed like special effects explosions and miniature work and all this kind of crazy stuff that really caught my interest of like, oh, there's actually people that's their job. They just make movie magic. That sounds like something for me.
Yeah. No, I did the exact same, like down to the, hey, I don't want to write this English paper. Can I just like reenact this story in a, luckily we had, mini DV at the time, which was a little, being able to figure out how to finagle that into a computer was less difficult than doing the, pause,
yeah,
do another deck, start, that whole thing, which I only had to do maybe twice in my life.
Yeah, it was definitely cumbersome edits, and sometimes there'd be like a big fuzzy, static screen in the middle. But it was a start. And I think we had a fight scene, we had a car chase, stupid stuff you do in high school.
Yeah, totally. Did you guys have really sort of strong influences growing up? Was it like specific artists or films maybe that kind of really got you going?
In my case, when I was 16, I left home and I ended up finding a mentor that was into art and photography and stuff like that. So I was very lucky. And I got to appreciate, I was living in London at the time. And of course, you only have to walk a few blocks and there's an amazing art gallery. And, and so I was always inspired by painting and filmmaking and, that whole process. So I was very exposed to that. So I was very lucky,
Yeah. Luke?
Yeah, I would say my childhood, I don't want to say it was devoid of art, but like art really wasn't a big part of it. It wasn't really until I got into college that I really started appreciating things. But I do remember like a couple of films, seeing them as a kid that like really drew me into the idea of filmmaking. Like The Sound of Music, for some reason, was the only movie I could watch if I stayed homesick from school. Like, I don't know, it was like clean enough or something.
But, like allowed to.
Yeah. So,
okay.
But it was also like 5 hours long. So it basically took up the whole school day. So I probably watched that a bunch of times growing up. And I watched it again as an adult. It's really good filmmaking. Like it still holds up.
Come to find out. Yeah.
It's beautiful, large format. It's like a lot of the things I really like and gravitate to are in that movie. It just, I guess it had a stronghold early on, but really it was more once I got into college that I got more into seeing the world around me, I guess you'd say.
And you went to film school as well?
I did. Yeah. I started going to a school for computer science and I went for, a semester and I thought, I haven't learned anything. I'm teaching people things. I don't know what I'm doing here. I thought I'll go to school for something that I don't know what to do. I don't know how it works. And if I fail, I could always, go get a job in IT. And so I tried Columbia College in Chicago. They had a great cinematography program and really, really fell in love with lighting there. They had really, they had a little stage that we could use. They had real lights, real film cameras. And I guess that's pretty common now. Like film schools at basically every school these days. But like that,
you'd hope
it was
so,
really
but
changing.
Yeah, I when I went to film school, we had like 2 DVXs, and then eventually the 5D came out, which Gale will have to get to. And everyone was always fighting over the 5D, and we were just like begging the film department, like, "Can you buy that red one?" And they were like, "Absolutely not. We don't have that many."
Yeah. So when I was there, it was almost all 16 millimeter. And like the thing we would fight over would be they'd get a Panavision 35 millimeter camera in like for a couple months out of the semester or something. But so I was really heavily into actual film, chemistry and all that stuff. And then kind of like right after, just like learned everything about how it works just in time for no one to use it and for it to kind of fade into the forgotten land.
Yeah, no, and actually, Gale, to your point, I've noticed that a lot of really established filmmakers all started with painting, and I know, or like paintings. Not all, are painters, but it's kind of fascinating because whenever I'll read like older ASC magazines or older books or whatever, they're always talking about like study the masters, study painting, and I don't quite see that as much. These days, people don't really go back that far. It's usually like study the masters of film. Do you still see value in studying paintings and how that can?
For any person that has ambitions in the film industry, such as a camera operator or a DP, I think there's nothing better that you can do with your spare time. I mean, I think in a way, of course, there are 1,000 great DPs out there that have probably only ever used digital and never ever had the luxury of being able to use film. But I think the very act, it's kind of why I was referring to darkroom work, because it taught me much more than I could possibly learn It taught me much more than I could possibly learn just by working digitally, because digital is a sort of rather esoteric kind of non-existent thing. It's pixels which don't actually mean anything in the real world. Whereas grains of silver that get exposed to light and then with the chemical reaction will go black if they've received light. I mean, that's a very tangible and tactile kind of experience. And when you can get into a dark room and use your hands under an enlarger to dodge a print and hold back something, it's a process that makes you completely understand the values of contrasting shapes and tones, such as, putting the bright side of somebody's face against a darker thing in the background and vice versa. These are incredibly important lessons, and I don't know how you get those in the digital world. And I think, because in reality, if you take a digital camera, if you have patience and you twiddle the knobs long enough, eventually a picture will turn up, and then you're a DP. By the very nature of the fact that you can shoot an image, you're a DP. And I think, luckily there's not too many of those around, but there's a few of them. And, and I think they've missed out on a whole process, which is terribly important because, real analog photography, I think, is what it's all about. And digital is only a way of getting around that. And I really do feel that we jumped into digital before we were ready because it was an economic factor. My goodness, this is cheap. This is producers and UPM saying, use this. It's, we can shoot rubber on a piece of plastic and it's amazing. And, you don't get clunk, 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 clunk when the 1,000-book magazine runs out. And, and I think it's, obviously it's improved enormously, but we jumped in too soon. It's rather like if you compare an MP3 sound recording to, something on a 12-track tape. There's no comparison to somebody with a good ear. And so everything's racing towards being cheaper. And sometimes we miss out and have quality suffer as a result. And for example, just in our color suite, we used to have Sony monitors to judge the color, and there were CRTs, cathode ray tubes. And the color quality was absolutely superb, but they cost about $35,000, and they're not particularly nice for the environment. So then they all jumped to flat screen LCDs or LEDs or whatever they were when they came out, which about $1,500, but no different than any monitor that you or I could buy. So, and I still think we suffer in that area because when we go into our color suite, we have two monitors to look at. One is an HD one, and one is maybe a representation of what you may see at home, if you're lucky. But they're completely different, and there's no real standard. So it makes it pretty hard. But I think digital now, in terms of digital capture, has, is quite viable versus film. But there's obviously still a lot of very high-end DPs and directors that still can insist on shooting film, which I think is really, really hard to beat. And, but the convenience of digital, where you can just twiddle a knob and you've got 12 different ISOs that you can use to your own pleasure, or, change from daylight to tungsten balanced film just by flipping a switch. These are things that are, wonderfully helpful. And, but I still think we have a ways to go before you would say, my goodness, do people actually use film? It looks so crappy. We haven't got there yet with sensors. We're getting close. That's we all have our own subjective and personal points of view, but that's mine for sure. Luke, do you want to add to that?
Well, for me, like I said, I learned film and then all my experience has been digital. So it's like this, fond memory or some kind of theory that I didn't really, get to grasp onto as much. And so I often wonder, like, how much of this is like hazy memory of me thinking, oh, this was better before, and how much of it is really actually better. But something that you often talk about, which is when you shot film, not everyone got to see the image until a day or two later. And you mention that quite often. And I have the same feeling, like being able to see exactly what you're shooting while you're shooting it is both good and bad at the same time. But I feel like in the last few years, the digital cameras they're no longer leaving something to be desired. Like, they're just different than film. They're not less than anymore. They're just sort of different. And I think that's remarkable, because for many years it was, oh, well, if we were shooting this on film, it would look better, or this highlight would fall off nicer, or whatever. But I feel like I haven't had that thought in quite a while, maybe 5 years or so. It seems like things have really improved lately.
I mean, it is difficult because the cost difference is absolutely enormous. And of course, that's what actually drives everything, is the mighty dollar. So unless there's a very specific reason, we're not going to be allowed to go backwards anytime soon.
Yeah, it's funny because there's I completely agree. Like, digital, that is the one thing though. You got to really, to get the, I'm going to start at the beginning of this sentence. We all have this, as you were saying, this kind of nostalgic memory of film. And so there's a lot of people, that being the gold standard, there's a lot of trying to replicate film, the quote unquote film look. I hear about it all the time online and whatnot. And I've noticed that used to be a shortcut to mean high quality, right? Because we were shooting tiny sensors, DV, VHS, whatever. And now people are trying to replicate photochemical film with its flaws. And it's often people who never worked with film, but they want it to have that weight. It's something I've been thinking about a lot recently, because it's an interesting sort of psychological tick that people seem to have now.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think there's been a huge push to use older lenses that have a slightly less than perfect look. Because when we started on Grace and Frankie, it was tough because the cameras felt almost like they were designed for medical analysis. They were so detailed, and it's like the last thing we wanted. We needed a softness and a sort of a gentleness to the image, and not something that was incredibly sharp and electronic looking. And that's the way I felt about digital cameras when they first started being adapted. When they first started being adopted. It is obviously huge leaps and bounds away, and it's in such a short period. What, in 6, 7, 8 years? The improvements have been incredible and profound. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, I did want to ask, before we get into the Grace and Frankie stuff. Like I said, my film school, I was in college, watching lots of episodes of House. And like I said, our film school just got that one 5D. And I remember when that what was it? Help Me, that season finale that you shot on the 5D.
Season 6.
Yeah, that was a huge sea change for us, because finally I wasn't a big DSLR person at the time for video. I still wanted the full body and all that, but many of my classmates saw that as, and I do now in retrospect, saw that as sort of a verification that the tool was good enough that if you put something good in front of it, it would be, I suppose, accepted by audiences. I was wondering if you could kind of explain, especially, how far we've come now, or not explain, but just talk about what that shooting experience was like, especially compared to shooting film, but also maybe what you would have done differently with today's tools if you had to do the same thing.
Sure. When we shot the famous 5D episode of House, it wasn't because I wanted to be some kind of radical monster that was trying to do something different, because there were an awful lot of naysayers when we were setting it up that said, oh, you're crazy, it's rubbish, you should use this or do that. And the reality was our sets were all 3 feet tall. And if you took, because it was a collapsed car park, if you took an area with a 1,000-foot magazine on there and put it on a head, it actually wouldn't fit in the set. So, we had to find something that was very tiny. And for a while, there is actually a 35mm camera that's designed to fit in a tube, and the magazine goes behind. But I mean, there's just one of them, and they're not sync sound, and they're not blimped. So then Jason LaForêt came out with a movie called Reverie, which just blew me away. And I was told it was shot on a DSLR and a Canon, and I just thought, this is insane. And I thought it was beautiful. And so I thought, well, surely we could make something like as good as that work. And so we did tests, and I still get twinges of pain from the focus pullers stabbing knives into my voodoo doll, because they hated me, because it was the greatest nightmare of all time for a focus puller, because we basically shot with Canon stills lenses that don't stop when you get to infinity. They just keep on turning. And so trying to control focus was incredibly difficult. So we had some major difficulties, just sort of, and because it was a full frame sensor, we were suddenly shooting with incredibly shallow depth of field. And that made it really tricky. But it was incredible that, we could take this tiny camera and create images that were good enough to go on a network TV show, even though I think the compression then was H.264, which is pretty crappy now. But the weird thing is that compression, I think it doesn't matter a damn when you get in on close shots like this. You don't actually notice it at all. The only time you really see it is in wide shots where you're looking at lots of tiny details. And so it was the wide shots that gave it away a little bit. But as soon as you get into this, you really can't tell, because you're not expecting to see more than that. And so it worked perfectly for what we were doing. And we actually, initially, we thought we'd just shoot the certain scenes in the car park with the 5D Mark II, but we ended up loving the look of it so much that we shot the whole episode. Just because we loved the shallow depth of field, and it was just serendipitous that everything fell into place. It was an episode where House was in his own head and in his own world, and to separate him from everything with severe focus was kind of wonderful, because it isolated him as a human being and took him out of reality. And that's exactly the underlying theme of the episode. So it was a kind of wonderful experience, but very, very tough. And I suppose now, there are much more suitable cameras that shoot 4K that would, we used a C70 Canon, which is a fantastic little camera. It's just like a fat DSLR. Shoots 4K, shoots 120 frames a second. It's kind of like, my goodness, it's just getting really insane. So there are some wonderful tiny little cameras around now that would have done the job much better and not force us into that compression algorithm that, was a little bit damaging. Yeah. But what I love more than anything was, because of Vincent and his work, and then because of House, the thing that made me most proud more than anything else was the fact that, my goodness, here we are. We've just discovered or been part of the democratization of filmmaking, because a kid can get his dad to buy him a camera for his birthday and get a lens and then steal a bootleg copy of some editing program from somewhere, and suddenly you're a filmmaker. And you can do this at home, and you can do it with your friends, and you can make a movie and tell a story. And, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, not possible. It would cost you too much in terms of film. And, even, when I was a kid, my dad used to shoot home movies at the weekends with the Bolex. Can you imagine how much that would cost now?
Yeah.
Shooting 16mm film. This democratization of the filmmaking process, I think, giving this gift to kids that wanted to grab it, to go make movies that could actually be done for nothing almost. That was kind of like, to be part of that makes me probably more proud than anything, because inevitably, great EPs and great directors and great editors are going to come out of that world because they had that opportunity,
Yeah, no, it's interesting you mentioned Vincent, because I remember he was seen more as, maybe just in my circle, but like an internet guy. Like we knew him from articles and stuff. So Reverie was like, that looks great, but that's still an internet guy. And then House was like, oh my goodness, it's on television. Like I can buy this on DVD. This is crazy, It was a very, very interesting seminal moment. Luke, what were you doing about that? I think we're about probably the same age.
What year was that, Gale?
My God, you're asking somebody with a memory like me.
I think it was like 2010.
2010. So I was working my way up the Hollywood lighting department ladder, just watching, sort of like watching other DPs on set, learning. But I think I didn't learn about that particular episode until I started working with Gale, and he told me about it.
Oh,
so I just wasn't really on my radar. Sure.
What I've interviewed a few people who came up in the lighting department two episodes ago, which will make this weird timeline of podcasts make no sense. But 2 episodes ago, Jeff Cronenwith, he came up as an AC. There was, which is not in the lighting department. I started that sentence and then realized I was wrong. But anyway, there's been a few guys, but I'm wondering what sort of thing you spent how many, 63 episodes gaffing Grace and Frankie. What, before you hopped into DP, what are the sort of important things that you learned as a gaffer and as a lighting technician, that you think, coming up in that realm made you a better DP versus people who just stuck to camera first? Because I definitely was a camera first guy, being a giant nerd.
Sure. So one thing that I always did as I was coming through the lighting department was pay attention to what the guy with the camera was doing and try to think about it like as I, what would I have done here? Or a lot of times if I was gaffing, I might nudge the DP on the shoulder and say, did you think about this? Or, so I was always sort of like getting in their rice bowl, so to speak, or really collaborating heavily, which I didn't stop with Gale on Grace and Frankie. But I think one of the advantages is that a lot of people that come up to the camera side of things are so busy doing the camera stuff and focused on the camera stuff that they may not have the time or the extra mental power to see kind of what's going on with the lighting and think about why it's happening. And so when they get the reins of the camera and it's their job to design the lighting, sometimes it's like almost like a starting over. They don't really have the, they have to really lean on their gaffer at that point. So I think that's one advantage is just sort of like the lighting stuff is like, I got it down pat. It's in my back pocket. I don't really even have to struggle with it, or, you know what I mean? Like when I started shooting, I had to worry more about talking with the camera operators, talking with the director, which kind of came naturally, I guess, or whatever, from just being around the same people. I was lucky that I came up or made the move on a show I was already at home on. So
Sure.
I wasn't meeting new people. I was just filling a void that was there, at first just for a couple days at a time when Gale was scouting.
Sure.
So I think that's kind of the main thing, is just having a really good handle on the lighting. That way it's not bogging me down when I'm doing DPing.
Yeah. What are some things maybe that you've learned that people should not do when trying to achieve a cinematic look with their lighting? Obviously we've got our far side key and all that kind of thing, but any sort of moves that you saw that ended up not being effective that you noted?
Well, like for me, I think the far side key is a nice starting point a lot of times, but some people get afraid of breaking that rule. And I want the light to come from the window or from the source. And for me, it doesn't bump a lot of people. But for me, it's distracting when your close-up's perfectly lit with a far side key and the front's falling off into shadow, but that the window is on that shadow side, and where's that light coming from? For me, it kind of subconsciously takes you out of it. So I don't know if that's good advice or not, because a lot of people are doing really well with just following that formula. But I think you're going to get more truth to your lighting if you light with some motivation that comes from something, your lamp that's in the shot, or your window that's nearby, or whatever. So I think falling too far into a formula, if I had to put it in just like a short sentence, is a mistake that I see some people making. But again, the nice thing about the formula is they're still going to look good. And I hear a lot of people say that. Well, as long as they look good, it'll be fine. And a lot of times that can be true. Yeah.
It is. Well, and now too, you can actually, in some instances, light with said practicals. I've seen a lot more taking away of light than adding light these days. That actually brings up a question for both of you. How were you approaching lighting for film versus lighting for digital? Because the digital sensors are so sensitive. Is it just a matter of throwing as much neg in there as possible to try to just maintain it, or is there something else going on?
I've personally never really considered lighting with the two different medium any differently, because more or less the dynamic range of a good digital camera and a film are fairly similar. Around 14 stops, something like that. And so the contrast relatively can be very, very similar. I believe that it's all about shape and creating depth through shape, from my point of view. And I think I wouldn't really do anything different for film or for digital, because basically the image is the image. But I think what Luke was saying is very true. I think, and it's also different depending upon what type of show you're making. We, in a comedy like ours, which I actually really hate the phrase sitcom. I think it almost feels like an insult.
Sure.
Because to me it suggests terrible lighting. Every time somebody goes near a wall, there's 4 shadows on the wall, which irritates me enormously. And so sitcom to me represents something that doesn't have any base in reality. It's just a kind of, you almost expect that sound of a fake door on a studio to close. It doesn't have the same sound because you hear it bounce around off the ceiling in the studio, and it all sounds fake. And I've all my life tried to create images and shoot digital or film that actually felt cinematic, like a movie. And it's also more important, I think, in a comedy, because it's not like you're doing very fast cuts like in an action film where the light can come from anywhere and you don't have time to study it. We're often lingering on shots with 2 people. And then we cut around to the other side where we linger on the shot. So you have time for the subconscious to pick up things like where the key light's coming from and whether it feels real, and is this coming from the window or is the light coming from the practical that was at the end of the sofa. Those things are terribly important because you create a kind of mental geography with light. And I think it's terribly important to really be honest, because even if you end up with the camera for a large part of the scene being directly in front of the window, which suggests totally flat and boring light, I think you have to go there or go in that direction and cheat it a little bit, because otherwise you lose the believability. I mean, so it's always felt great to actually try and do something that was kind of real and not overlit and not lit from the wrong angles. And I should let Luke do more talking.
Oh, I thought he was kicking it to you. I thought you had a thing. No, because I was going to say.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I got nothing.
We're gonna have a polite off.
All right.
Because I had read an older article in ASC Mag about your guys' lighting setups on Grace and Frankie, and at a quick glance, it seemed like they were basically just saying, "Yeah, we just slammed as much light into this set as possible because we wanted, to do our actors a favor, as it were." But then you watch clips from the show, and it's not, as you're saying, flat or anything. There's, plenty of contrast in the image and it's just incredibly soft. So I was wondering if you could kind of walk us through, that article was from, I believe, season 4, 2017.
It's pretty early. Yeah.
So how did those setups start and how did they change to now?
Sure. You want to talk, Gale, or you want me to?
No, you can kick this one off.
So probably what happened is, when we gave that interview, we were sort of trying to describe what we were doing, but even then, I think we were still struggling to describe what we were doing on set because it wasn't something that it was different from how we'd done things on other shows. And it was it's like, there's lights everywhere and there's muslin everywhere and there's light coming from everywhere. And to most, when you just say that, it sounds like, oh, it's probably really flat in front.
Yeah.
But ultimately what we were doing is we were sort of almost lighting it's like the cast would be sitting almost like for a portrait where we were studying their faces and the shapes of, how they were going to look. And we'd do the best we could to accentuate and fill in or do whatever we can to make them look great, except for they were in a moving picture. So they were going to walk around and move around and stuff. But what we would do is we'd have light coming sort of from everywhere, but then we would balance the areas of light the same way you might balance a key light or a fill light if you just say 3-point lighting. So our 3-point lighting might have been 140 degrees of a key light and then 120 degrees of a fill light and then maybe a backlight. But then we would balance the relative values of all those amongst each other. And because of the way we were doing that, you didn't end up with just the flat, like light right over camera look, but we still were able to sort of shape and adjust and work with our cast to try to make them look great without, contrast in the wrong area or whatever. And it also filled in the set a little bit more. So there are some shots with some shadows on the walls and stuff, but they feel kind of natural and it doesn't feel like, oh, they just really blasted a bunch of light at the set. And it's sort of, because the set are coming from everywhere, you've got the right kind of fall off on everything. And that's sort of how it worked. But like I said, I think we just didn't even know how to describe it ourselves at the time when we were interviewed, because it was sort of still being developed and still being figured out, and just it was working, but we weren't really sure quite why at the beginning, I think.
Sure.
I'd like to add a little bit to that. Excuse me. I've noticed probably in the last 5 years that even newscasters on CNN have quite a lot of underlighting coming up. And of course, it makes them look younger. It takes away a lot of lines and things like that. So that's the kind of basic idea. It's like putting fill everywhere, but it's a little bit overdone in cases like that, because you see occasionally if they pass their hand to grab something or grab a glass of water, there's a shadow goes over their faces. And so if we ever had that, we'd have to do the shot again and figure out another way of doing it. And it was really just to create complete softness so that the lighting becomes shadowless. But that was only really for the foreground, for Jane and Lily particularly, because it's almost like you've been presented with the crown jewels of Hollywood. You've got Lily Tomlin and Jane Fonda, and it's like, are you going to make them look good, or are you going to get fired tomorrow? and it was terribly important to make them look good. And that's the respect they deserved anyway, because they've been doing such amazing things all their careers that you have to take care of them and make them feel good and feel confident, because basically actors strip naked on a set. They bare their souls, and so the more confidence that you can give them in terms of that they're really being looked after in terms of the way they look, and we're not going to let anything through our net, our safety net, that they're not going to be happy with on dailies. Right. And that's when you sometimes become very unpopular as a DP, saying, that was terrible, I need another one. Everyone's going, wow, that was fantastic. But you know very well that Jane would hate it because of something we'd missed, or, so that's incredibly important too. But there's also a huge separation between foreground, where we did all this soft lighting, and then background. And the background was where we could create shape and contrast, which balanced out the flatness of the foreground. And I got one day to thinking almost like Jane and Lily were almost like the filament of a light bulb inside a soft light. And so they became the filament, because we were bouncing light off all the mirrors right up to the edges of frame, all the way around them. So they were kind of almost like inside a white umbrella, and they being the center, naturally, they're the light bulb. And right. It's funny, even with that soft Mars, you'd be surprised how it actually concentrates the light to where Jane and Lily are, because all the Mars is actually focused on them, even though talking about focusing a piece of fabric sounds insane. It actually does work. And, because there are some pieces that aren't lighting the background because they're at right angles to the background, but they're all on Jane and Lily. So it does actually concentrate, and they do become the lamp. And it's kind of rather an interesting concept. And then we keep the backgrounds contrasty just to create that separation,
Totally. Luke, what... you guys, how many seasons is this? Seven seasons of the show.
7 seasons,
yes.
Yeah.
Sick run. How did the technology change? We'll get into the cameras in a second, because fun fact, this webcam is a C500 Mark II.
Okay.
So I do want to ask about that. But in terms of the lighting, how did the fixtures change? Because that's like right in the middle of the LED sort of revolution really taking hold.
Yeah. So we were both completely stuck in the past, and also a little bit pushing the envelope on the, the LED front. For almost all the lights that landed on the cast, except for maybe some backlights, were all tungsten units. Usually we had Aries got a 2K open face light that we set up 20 or 30 of them, maybe in a setup. That was kind of our main thing, or 9 light phase or tungsten 10Ks, 20Ks outside the windows. So we were pretty much all tungsten, even up to the end, with the exception of we used LED space lights. I think we had one of the first orders of Mole's LED space light, which was bicolor. So that was a big change for us. Just, if you think about gelling maybe 30 space lights over the beach, that you just don't do it, because it would take a rigging crew a few hours to put quarter blue on. It's just not worth it, or whatever you were going to do. But right. Obviously with the LED space lights, you just dial in the color, oh, it's a gloomy day. Cool. Make it, make it a little bit bluer, a little bit darker like that. That was nice. So we did play with that, and we had a few LEDs around. I used some Asteras in the last season for some on-camera effects and stuff.
Everybody's loves those. Every single DP. I want Astera to sponsor this podcast so bad because they get so much free advertising.
Yeah, I mean, being able to take a light and not have any other parts, and that you can turn it on and put it where you want it, that's great. Now, I get anxiety about the batteries running out, but as a DP, just tell somebody that this is your job to pay attention to the batteries, and then you can not worry about it as much.
Astera technician.
Yeah, right. But we really just LEDs were mostly for backlights and space lights, and nearly everything that was landing on someone's face was a tungsten element.
And was that because of the sort of full spectrum output of the tungsten versus LEDs, which up until very recently were quite spotty dodgy in that regard, or was there any other reasoning?
So I think you've got a couple of factors. One would be we started with what Gale's used to, or what Gale's, seasoned with. It was his style. And then two was, this full spectrumness to, our show is all about faces. It's all faces. And so skin tone is, paramount. And so you've got the camera that has a lot to do with that, the color grading and the lights. You've put a sky panel on someone's face and you don't change the color in post, it's probably going to be fine. But when you start making an adjustment into some color that's not in that spectrum, you're going to lose. There's sort of like a graying that happens, or sort of like a color just gets sapped out. And for a lot of shows, that's fine because it just is. But our show is all about skin tone and faces and laughs. And so for us, that was kind of important. And I also think that the cast has been doing it for a while. And they have a way they're used to looking. They were lit with tungsten units for their whole careers, and I think it was sort of like, why change it if it's not broken kind of thing.
Yeah, I actually I read an article that Steve Yedlin, an interview he did when he was shooting Last Jedi, and he was saying that he shot all the old, like Mark Hamill and Carrie Fisher and all them on film because that cadence is what they were used to. But then all the younger people he shot digital, and this is probably a generalization, but he shot all the younger people on digital because they were used to that speed and that, it all looks the same on the screen. He's a fantastic DP and color scientist, but for the on-set work, he was like, we're going to do it traditional for the people who are used to that, and we're going to do it digital for the people who are used to that. I believe
that you work in the way that they're used to, and for instance, we still rehearsed and we blocked and we rehearsed, we lit and we rehearsed again and we shot. And, Jane liked that last rehearsal. She liked to get into it. That's part of her process. A lot of people don't want, they want to shoot a rehearsal or get going or whatever, but she was used to that sort of discipline of, rehearse it, help everyone get the marks, know where we're going to be, and so again, with the lighting, it's sort of the same thought process, at least when we started, and kept working well, so kept with it.
Yeah.
Excuse me. I think one of the things that we also did was we shot to a pretty deep stop. We tended to shoot around T4 for the whole show, and lots of people now, of course, they like to shoot wide open to get more kind of character out of the lenses. But we I felt it was very important that we didn't have to keep going again because of focus issues, because for our dear actors to have to go through makeup for several hours and then work a 10-hour day and go home and learn 5 pages of dialogue, last thing you want to do is to keep on putting them through extra takes because, the focus was just a little bit off here or there. And so I think it was very important. And even the best focus pullers in the world are struggling around 1.4 or 2. And it was more important to give the actors less technical reasons to have to go again, so that we could just go for the performances. And, I think that was a very important decision. and also, you know, in a comedy, so much of it is played in two shots, and you have Jane and Lily in a shot, and it's unlikely they're equidistant from the camera. And those tiny little focus shifts backwards and forwards I find really irritating. And they start taking me out of the moment. So, I mean, I'll even admit shamefully that I shot at 11 or 16 even sometimes, because if they were really at a great distance and the dialogue was kind of quite fast between them, like they were having an argument, you know, it looks horrible to be, you know, doing this the whole time. And so by shooting at such a deep stop, even though the actual image itself wasn't the proudest thing for me, it worked much better for the actors and for the script and for the story. And so that's the kind of compromise that I don't mind making, because really, what are you there for? It's to tell the story and have the actors do their thing. You know, we are very much, you know, not at the top end of the pecking list. You know, we have to create pleasing images, but they're images that enhance the story and help the actors. And, you know, so is that what we were talking about?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Something I would add to what, let me just add to what
ahead.
Gale was saying quickly. So we shot at a T4, but we also rated the cameras at 400. So we were shooting at a much brighter overall level than, you know, a normal show might be shooting at 800 or 1600, probably 8 to 16 times the amount of light that a lot of shows are using these days. So again, a lot of like a strong light coming in from outside the window, and LED's just not gonna cut it.
Yeah,
you know, we're getting there, but you know, we started the show back in 2014. We didn't have the really powerful LEDs that have come out now, and so again, tungsten is just easy. You can turn on more power globes, and it just gets brighter.
Yeah, and less expensive. That's always something I always tell people is like, if you're on a budget, like, and you can figure out the power situation and maybe the heat, like tungsten's usually cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's something, one other bonus about shooting at such high light levels is that the iris of the eye in the actor shuts right down. So you get much more color in the eyes. If you shoot, you know, at 1.2 or at 1600 ISO or something like that, the iris is just a big black pupil. And so you lose that. And I think that's kind of like, you know, especially in a comedy where you really want to see what's going on in an actor's eyes, it kind of worked really well from that point of view. And by the way, when LEDs first started coming out, Luke would bring them onto set and I'd poke them with a stick for a couple of days and be very suspicious, because I've always actually, I can't really prove it, and it's probably just absurd and I'm just an old traditionalist, but I've never trusted HMIs. I think they're like incredibly powerful fluorescents, and they don't have a pure spectrum. They have bands of different colors that somehow fool the eye into thinking that you're looking at a full spectrum. But I think there are pieces missing, and I miss those pieces, and I can't prove it. But I know something's missing, and they don't feel right. And so I tended to be a bit suspicious about LEDs for the very same reason. There's something about a piece of tungsten that's heated in a vacuum. And first of all, it glows orange, and then it becomes white and almost blue. That to me is, I understand that that's light, and it's but some kind of electronic thing that kind of glows because it's got some kind of diode thing in it. That's a bit suspicious. I mean, of course, Luke has educated me enormously about how brilliant you know, LEDs can be, and especially with the space lights and the flexibility and so on and so forth. But it took me a tiny while to kind of accept them. But having now accepted them, and of course I love them, you know, so.
I mean, to be fair, the up until, like I said, very recently, LEDs were generally kind of brutal in the spectral output, you know, especially if you were trying to do like the blue ones were okay, but the tungsten colored ones were generally lacking.
Yeah.
I just got a set of these Kinoflo Divas that are just insane. They like have camera LUTs in them, so they'll put out the color spectrum that the camera's expecting. I was getting 100 TLCI. They're awesome. I don't work for Kino.
Kino has really, really done their homework, and I think they've done a nice thing. They're pretty late to the game, so kind of like time will tell if people pick it up and start using them. But they kind of stood back and did their homework. I was kind of impressed by what they were able to do.
Yeah, and I that's probably why it took them so long. They're like, well, let's do it right. And it was like, bro, it took you like a decade. You needed to be way faster. But yeah, I love those lights. I did want it. It was a very technical podcast. It's kind of fun. I know you guys started on the Epic for the first couple seasons and then moved to a C300 Mark II, and now you're on the C500 Mark II. And I was wondering, A, what made you choose Canon? Because you don't often see Canon cameras beyond documentary. They're very rarely in narrative. But also, any tips for me and anyone else who has the C500 in, maybe exposing the sensor? Anything you learned using it day in and day out? Because I bought this thing right before the pandemic, and it's basically sat here. I've used it 5 times on an actual shoot.
I think from the very, very get-go, Netflix decided on 4K was it. So the camera that I obviously thought of and hoped to use was the Alexa, but it was only 3.8K and it was banned. It wasn't in the winner's circle. So the only cameras that were in the winner's circle at that point in time were the Red Dragon, the F55, and I think we also, Lou reminded me that we did a test with a C300 with a 4K box on it.
Right.
But that was very cumbersome and very expensive and not easy to use and prone to problems. So really, we just had the choice between the Red Dragon and the F55 for the first 2 seasons, and it was really, really tough. We had to use nets on the back of the lenses just to soften the image out a bit. And but then along came the C300 Mark II, which was 4K built in. And we actually presented it to Netflix and said, please look at this camera because we're sure it makes all your specs. I think they call it future-proofing, this idea to do 4K, even though it seemed rather absurd at the time that you'd crush the image down to almost nothing and squeeze it down a thin little pipe to homes all over the world where people were watching it on unadjusted monitors. I mean, that didn't seem very fair when Roger Deakins was perfectly fine shooting a movie on a 60-foot screen on an Alexa. I mean, what's that all about?
Right.
But anyway, we didn't make the rules. So then the C300 Mark II came out, and it looked beautiful, and it was a beautiful sensor, and it was soft, and I've always felt that I've always loved Canon ever since the 5D episode, and the fact that they could bring this gift to young filmmakers and enable them to make movies. I mean, I thought that was that's such a fairy tale. I mean, it's beautiful. So I've always loved Canon for those sorts of reasons. And, I love the sensor on the 5D Mark II, and I even have the very, very first full-frame DSLR. And I can't even remember the number, and it's not even serviceable now, but it still takes beautiful images. And I fell in love with them from that moment, like the same full frame size and just beautiful. But the C300 Mark II changed everything for us, and it created amazing images, and their sensors, even between the C300 Mark II and the C700 and the C500 Mark II, their sensors have always had this beautiful quality, which is wonderful for skin tones. And, so that's how we got into bed with Canon, basically, because they were the first guys up there. And of course, again, I got a lot of stab wounds in the back from the assistants who hated it because, there were so many things that they were used to on the Alexa, like menus that didn't have little smiley faces and,
Right.
Things on the lenses that didn't have mountains to suggest infinity. I mean, it was basically a documentary or, a news camera. So we had to do so much to it to actually make it user-friendly on a TV show. I mean, it ended up looking like an abomination with all the stuff. It was like this crazy hedgehog,
Right.
With monitors and power outs and, special boxes to split power and split video. And, it was pretty insane. But having done it, it was worth it because in the end, I'm selfish. And all I thought about was, I don't give a damn whether this sensor comes in a cardboard carton. We're going to use it, because it looked beautiful. And so that was how that all began. And I'm sure Luke has something to add to all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think when we tested originally the C300 with the external recorder, we were looking at our tests, the very first tests we did, and we thought, well, we like the look of that, but nobody's going to bother with an external recorder on a television show. It just seemed like too much risk. So I think that was kind of, even though Gale had his, first DSLR that he loved, I think seeing them side by side in our first initial test kind of had us hoping to use that sensor. We just couldn't until the Mark II came out. But I find it interesting if you look at our show and you go and you look at just any episode from the first couple seasons, and then any episode from, say, season 3 or 4, so your kind of age range is the same. It's kind of surprising to me. I think the skin just looks better as soon as we changed cameras. There's a marked difference. And for me, like Gale said, it was difficult for the operators and the assistants. There's, sort of plastic bodies, and if you put a 12:1 zoom and about 50 things on the back of a C300, it looks ridiculous because you've got 2 inches of camera, 2 feet of lens, and then 2 feet of adapters behind it. It's just sort of obnoxious looking. But it worked. And over the years, we just sort of changed models based on sort of what was maybe the newest, or what was, the C700 had a few more of those menus that the assistants like, and it was full frame, which was fun, which gave us a look around so the operators could see what was coming into frame, and that really felt like a little bit more like a professional camera, and so it didn't feel as much like we were using a documentary camera. And then, like you said, you're using the C500, which we switched to in the end, which gave us the option to record RAW, which was new to our show. We had been recording in some kind of a compressed format that, so that was nice.
Probably.
Yeah. And I ended up shooting most of my episodes in the full frame mode, the 5.9K. So that was kind of a fun, like, a way to change the show a little bit without drastically departing from the look that we'd created over the years. Just a little different.
Did you experience any aha moments with it? Again, I'm just mining for gold here because I've found that, like, for instance, on the C300, I would expose a little higher. I remember one dude from Canon told me he was like, just expose until you just about to clip and then bring everything down in post. And I was like, okay. And I kind of did that. And then with the 500, I've noticed, like, I'm exposing skin at, like, key often. It seems to look better to my eye. But is there any sort of, like, things like that you ended up discovering with the new sensor and the new body?
I've never noticed that there was anything particularly different because I think Luke works in a similar way to me, but he'll tell you in a minute. I fell in love with the system of false color on a monitor called a Marshall, which is actually very out of date and old fashioned now. But what I loved about it was it broke everything into 10 points of IRE from absolute black to clipping. So, you know, in terms of colors, and I loved that. It wasn't like a transition from 50 IRE to 60 IRE. There was a distinct border and a change of color. So I could see exactly what I was shooting, and I could slide the exposure around because I'm really greedy. I don't want to throw away one piece of data until we decide to do that in our color session at the end, which is why I'd often, even shooting a night scene, get a tap on the shoulder. And somebody would say, Gale, you know, this is a night scene. You know, because if I expose it like they wanted to see it, and we didn't have a DIT because we never actually needed one. We just had a very good Canon reference monitor, and you know, and Rec 709, and so even night scenes looked way over bright because I'm not going to throw away the shadows until I decide to. As long as I'm not losing anything in the highlights and nothing's clipping, what's the point? You know, it's like, you know, completely pointless. I mean, why not have it all? And then you can decide, maybe you just want to window up a tiny bit of detail in that corner because it looks too somber and dark and there's nothing there. And, you know, so it gives you the value, I mean, the tools to actually, going back to my darkroom days, do your dodging and your, you know, printing in and, you know, in exactly the same way, because the software in post now is so beautifully sophisticated. You can do all of that in seconds with one guy. And, you know, and I mean, our color sessions, probably, we have a great colorist called Roy Bassich. Used to be Technicolor, now they're called some other weird thing like Lightstream something. I'll never remember it. But you know, he would do a pass and get everything looking fairly good. So the longest we'd ever spend doing a color session and making things look beautiful would be maybe 40 minutes or an hour at the most on an episode. Wouldn't you agree, Luke?
Yeah, I think by the last season we got it down to about an hour.
Damn.
Yeah. Now he would get it very close, and all that Gale and I really would have to do is sort of like he describes as dodging and burning. We just kind of get that. Oh, I remember I didn't put a shadow on that shoulder when we were shooting because we were in a hurry. So it's just take down that foreground shoulder a little bit, or you know, bring out that person in the background a little. But you know, we had that flexibility because we protected so much on set. And we weren't really like pushing the limits as we were shooting. We were sort of like Gale said, saving all the data or shooting very safely and making sure we didn't really had very little that would clip either above or below, you know, your shadows as well. We'd have a lot of detail. So then once we got in there with Roy, if there was anything that we wanted to change, it was very, very simple to do because all the data is there.
Yeah. I also, as you had mentioned earlier, that shooting at like 400 seems to be the magic zone for these sensors.
I think it's cleaner at 400. You know, it gets they say 800 is the native, but it's a little bit noisier. I had one, I think it was a technician tell me that it's actually 200 is the native, 800 is just where the dynamic range is distributed evenly. Oh, really?
So that's, I think, so 400 is halfway there.
I would believe that. Like, I would buy that.
Yeah.
So one thing I would do with the camera, since you asked about like, you know, something that's tips or tricks, or whatever, you can kind of do it on most cameras these days. But, you know, I was using some full frame prime lenses and there's only 7 in the set. So if I was shooting full frame, but it didn't have quite the right lens size, in the camera, it's pretty simple. Just make a switch to go to the 4K size in Super 35 crop mode. Suddenly, I had 2 sets of lenses, basically.
Yeah.
But you can kind of do that on any camera. But people don't often think to because for whatever reason, you just think that's my format. But the C500, that was pretty easy to do. And I think it was harder to do on the previous cameras we had on the C700. It was more difficult or something, or it didn't crop correctly.
Also, the fact is that I don't think our cooks would have been able to do that. I don't think they were designed for
that's right.
Because they were just designed for movies. And the same with the ingenieur zooms we had, which was another reason why for the final 12 episodes, we not only changed our camera, but we changed all our lenses to Canon lenses too.
Yeah. I gotta let you guys go here because we're about on time. But I did want to ask, kind of to wrap up. You were working, as you said, with two of the most legendary actresses in Hollywood, as well as other people who are on the show. And I was wondering if there was anything that they taught you about filmmaking, or any lessons that you took away from them that you found valuable.
That's a difficult question. I think, if you take an actress like Jane or an actor like Jane and Lily, she's done so many big movies. And so it's kind of important to treat her with the respect that she's deserved and earned over her career and all the wonderful work she's done. And the same applies to Lily. So I think there's a lot of rush and hustle and bustle on TV sets, and I think it's important to just go back, take a step back from that, and treat the actors like they're on a movie set. Even though you have faster schedules to meet and stuff like that, but it's like giving them respect. And I would often talk to Jane or something about if she could turn her head a certain way, it would help the camera angle and stuff like that. And, and having that kind of communication with the actors is terribly important as a cinematographer. And, but I think, Jane and Lily are both such class acts that we learned a lot just from working with them. They taught us a lot about how they like to, what their process is. And, they got on very, very, very well with actors. They got on very well with directors that were directors, because directors fall into several categories. But some directors, it's all about the actor and all about the script. And I think those are the directors that they really loved to work with, because they felt they were being allowed to bring out their best. And then there are other directors that going as far as directors that actually treat actors rather like props. That look nice over here because the light's coming through the window in a nice way, and whether there's any motivation for going to the window or not doesn't really matter a damn. And
the
so
school method of production value.
Yeah. It was an absolute honor to work with Jane, Lily, Sam, and Martin. They're all incredibly amazing actors, and it was just a wonderful experience for me.
Yeah. Luke, what about you?
Luke,
I'll point at like a memory I have from, I think it was the first episode. It might have been the second one, where Lily was doing a scene where she had to laugh and cry and get angry all in the same take. And it was late, and we'd done it 15 times or something. And, nobody really knew each other that well then yet. We'd all kind of just started working together. And I just found myself so impressed that she was able to do all that range and then reset and then do all that range again, just like without missing a beat. And, it was really an emotional scene, right? And I said, it was over and they'd wrapped, and I just said, Lily, that was so impressive, or, that was amazing. Like, you just really blew my mind. You're incredible today. That was just really awesome, or something like that. Some kind of, just expressed to her how impressed I was with what she'd just gone through. And very loudly, she just said, Luke, you did a really great job today. Just she probably didn't know what I was doing that day, but just that sort of like appreciation for the people that were around her and the gratitude. And I came to know over the years that she really paid attention to who was around her on set and who was on the crew. And if someone would come in and day play, she'd just stop on her way to go somewhere, stop in the middle of a sentence, say, "Hey, who are you? Nice to meet you. What are you up to?" You know, and that sort of like gratitude for the people around you and the humility to treat people like humans, or, you know, to treat people good, really. From just seeing from her example of that was something that really took away from her over the years. It's just like, just treat people well, no matter where they're at, no matter where you're at. I always remember that, the sort of gratitude and niceness.
That's awesome.
Yeah. You know, that's generally the final two questions of the podcast are a little different, but there's two of you, so it's hard to do that. But one thing that a lot of DPs have mentioned is like kindness and gratitude are the two of probably the main things I've heard over and over that will give you longevity in this career versus, you know, technical knowledge or, you know, having seen every Criterion movie, you know.
I think getting angry and yelling at people is no longer a way to make it in this business. I think that's sort of expiring, thankfully. You know, that was really a common thing for a long time for DPs to just shout at people or belittle people or blame people. And I think that's fading away, thankfully. I know I never went faster because someone yelled at me. And so...
Oh yeah, no, you're not gonna. you can only run on adrenaline for so long, you know, before you just get exhausted. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for spending this time with me. I really enjoyed that conversation, and you know, congrats on the show, and I look forward to seeing what you guys have next.
Thanks, really nice talking with you, Kenny.
Yeah, thank you ever so much. Can you do me a favor? Can you retouch my image so it looks as nice as yours?
Yep, I can do that.
Get a Canon camera, Gale.
Yeah. Cool.
Thank you so much. That was such a pleasure, and I'm certainly going to check out your podcast. It sounds very interesting, but you know how it is in this life. We only get a certain amount of time to do lots and lots of stuff, you know?
Yeah, well, it's. I feel like it is a very LA-centric podcast, not because of the DPs, but because you need about the same amount of time it takes you to get from the West Side to downtown or Burbank to listen to it.
Oh, that's perfect. Okay.
Cool. All right, guys. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, good luck. Thank you so much.
Frame and Reference is an Owlbot production. It's produced and edited by me, Kenny McMillan, and distributed by ProVideo Coalition. Our theme song is written and performed by Mark Pelly, and the F@R Matbox logo was designed by Nate Truax of Truax Branding Company. You can read or watch the podcast you've just heard by going to provideocoalition.com or youtube.com/owlbot, respectively. And as always, thanks for listening.